last video, I said I'd be buying myself a proper lathe, and here is one right behind my head. Did a little bit of rearranging down here to accommodate for it, and did a little bit of trying out with the thing too. Using cheap Aldi special chisels that are not designed for use on a lathe because that's what I've got to work with. And I have a few results of things I like to work with, things that not so good, and yeah, let's get to it. So, first thing I want to show is this taken from a 2x4. It is a piece of pine, and as you can see, it got all chewed up by the cutters. This is trash. Next thing I want to show is this piece of oak, which turned out better in terms of end result. However, it was spraying my neck with splinters. I don't like it. It's trash. Next up, we've got maple, which I've made into the handle for an improvised lathe tool, and poplar, which also turned out okay. There's a little bit of fuzz and chip out, but nowhere near as bad as the pine, and it doesn't shower my neck with splinters the way the oak did, so this is alright. My favorite wood that I've tried so far, though, has to be the Paduke. You remember this guy that I tried to make tunic pegs out of with that janky rig? Well, I've done it. Now I just need a peg shaper to get the taper and thickness just right, which I think this is way too big. We'll worry about that later. Now I'm going to try making a proper pair of tuning pegs from a blank, and I've glued and prepped up a Paduke blank just for that. Almost. Let me grab it real quick. So here is the blank. I've glued a couple pieces of plywood to it to help it go onto the lathe without wasting material. And now what I'm going to do is cut out some more of those stickers, put one on each of the 4 sides of this, and then octagonize it, or as they say in Alex Steele's workshop, octagon it, so that it can turn a little easier on the lathe, and I'll have my dividing lines more visible and not have them be made out of paper. So let me go ahead and get that done real quick, and I think I'll just do a speedy bit of that. There we go. Yeah. Well, as you can see, I have finished octagonifying it, so now it is time to put this thing on the lathe and start the shop vac, because the only tool I have right now that can make good grooves, which is going to be very important to keep the shape where I want it to be, is the file set, and the file set makes a lot of dust, which would be bad for my lungs, bad for my sinuses, just bad all around. So, looks like I'll be doing a narrating bit here. Before we get to the spinny fun time, I want to bring your attention to the little Tonka truck tire on the left-hand side of the screen. I didn't know what that was until after I recorded all the footage for this video, and I'm lucky that nothing major happened because of that, because, as it turns out, it makes the tailstock spike thing move in and out of the socket, which is an important safety feature because that means you can tighten up your workpiece in the lathe and not have it all flippy, floppy, spinny whatever way it wants to. On a more expensive lathe, that Tonka truck tire would be a much larger diameter wheel, but mine was cheap, so that's what I ended up with. I may at some point rip that thing off and make a better wheel, but for now I'll make do. Moving on to the lathe work, eye and ear protection are a must for something like this because this is just absolutely noisy. Especially when you start putting the cutter against the wood, that makes, so much noise. I started off using the file to set my grooves, but I quickly set it down and ended up just using the corner of a chisel because that was just easier. But even without the file, the bucket vac is pretty important because, for one, the chisel itself makes dust, and for another, you have to sand the stuff you're working on, and that generates dust as well. And that's just bad for your lungs, so keep the dust under control, folks. It's important. Here, the sacrificial plywood chipped away too much on one end, forcing me to take the blank out, score the other end, and put it back in backward, which resulted in something we'll get into later. Right here, I moved the camera to set up for my next shot because I thought I was done. However, on further inspection, I noticed one of the ends was kind of lumpy and needed more work. So, back to the lathe for more spinny fun time. And at the last minute, I decided to go ahead and give it a good sanding, as mentioned previously. And then I tried some bamboo glue that I have for my cutting board. It goes on pretty easily. Just splorch a bit onto a paper towel and hold it against the workpiece. Bam! Shiny. Alrighty, it is done. My assistant over here and over here will go ahead and show you what this looks like in comparison to these guys to show you the improvement. I'm pleased with how the bamboo glue turned out, and I would gladly use this in an instrument that I build in the future, with one caveat. This center parting line here that I'm going to be cutting along drifted towards this end. I need to keep that in mind and try to do better at keeping that centered, because if it drifts too far one way or the other, I'm going to be losing a tuning peg and only getting one out of a blank that way. So I gotta practice, and in the spirit of practice, I'll go ahead and prep up a few more blanks and do some more turning after the glue dries. Okay, now I have 3 pairs of tuning pegs, each with their own flaws. The first pair, which you saw me make, got poked in the end by the live center because the plywood was too thin. The second pair that I made, I tried different techniques slightly from what I did the first, and it's more angular and not quite as deep as the first one. And the third one, well, it looks just fine. It matches the first one pretty well. Unfortunately, it's too big to fit in the peg shaper that I plan on buying. So none of them are actually usable until I get a chuck for my lathe to do a little bit more refining. But that's okay, because I've got the general idea down, and I think the next time I make tuning pegs, I'm just going to freehand it instead of doing the stencils, because I do have a little compassy, pointy thing, pictured right here where the furnace is at, and that should scribe lines very easily, because I just tried it out on a piece of scrap wood and it works just fine. Now, before I close off this video, there is one more thing I'd like to try, specifically with regards to this first one that I made. And if you look closely, you'll notice it's really dark there on the end. Well, I don't know how well it shows up, but that's because it got hot on the belt sander. I haven't sanded the ends of the other two, but Purple Heart does a similar thing where it darkens if you heat it. And I'm wondering how dark I can get both Purple Heart and Padauk with a heat gun. So I'm going to move you over to a place that's a little more heat resistant than my lathe, and we're going to try this out. Okay, so here I have an offcut from the first Padauk blank that I messed around with, and here is an old scrap of Purple Heart that I'm not sure what else I'm ever going to do with it, so I might as well use it for a little bit of science. And here I have a heat gun, so let's get started. Well, I'm not really digging this effect, and it does easily scrape off with the razor. So I'm probably not going to be darkening the Padauk with a heat gun, because, no. Now let's try the Purple Heart. Look at that luxurious deep purple. I'm going to scrape it with the razor blade just because. Just see how it reacts and interacts. How deep it goes. Not very, because it's not on the other side. But that goes deep enough. I think I'll be using that in my instrument build. But we'll see later. Well, that just about does it for this video. In the next one, I will be starting on this project right here. But before I can do that, I need to make just a few little tools. So until then, cheers, I got some cleaning up to do.